In a quiet town where everyone thinks they know each other, trust is currency, and once it's broken, things start to unravel fast. This story begins with something so small it could have gone unnoticed. A police dog pausing at a nurse's locker during a routine school drug sweep. But what they found inside cracked open a life no one truly understood, a life of carefully constructed lies, shattered by one innocent sniff. If you enjoy grounded, emotional thrillers rooted in small-town secrets, hit like and subscribe. It helps us bring you more stories that stay with you long after they end. The hallway of Pine Valley High always smelled faintly of floor polish, stale air, and whatever perfume the students had overapplied that morning. It was a Monday, gray and quiet, and the kind of cold that got into your teeth. Officer Hank Talbot stood near the gym entrance, his arms folded over his chest, his breath fogged in the chilled air as his K-9 partner, Jasper, sat patiently beside him, tail flicking like a metronome. The drug sweep was routine, once a semester like clockwork. The school board insisted it was about deterrence, though Talbot suspected it had more to do with giving the parents something reassuring to chew on. Jasper was getting older, but still sharp. He'd once found a mess stash under a floorboard in a church basement. That kind of dog. The gym teacher, Coach Barlow, leaned against the wall a few feet away, watching with the lazy amusement of someone who didn't think anything real would happen. "Any luck so far?" he asked. Talbot just grunted. "We'll see." Locker by locker, the scent-trained German shepherd sniffed. Some were skipped entirely. Others received a second pass. Students had been herded into classrooms, leaving the corridors empty. The silence made Talbot uneasy. It was too still, like a theater stage waiting for its first scream. Then Jasper stopped, locked on, tail rigid, nose pressed against locker 117. "Here," Talbot said, kneeling. Jasper whined low in his throat, not aggressive, but alert. Locker 117. Talbot checked his clipboard. The locker belonged to Mara Ellings, the school's nurse, not a student. That was odd. He knocked just in case. No answer. Barlow raised an eyebrow. What the hell would the nurse be keeping in there? Talbot didn't answer. His instincts kicked in. He called the principal, had a witness come down, unlocked the locker. Inside were ordinary things at first. A folded white coat, a lunch bag, some pens, and a half-used bottle of ibuprofen. But wedged at the back, under a towel, was a sealed Tupperware container. It was filled with pills. Loose, unlabeled, a rainbow of prescription drugs that should have never left a pharmacy shelf. Barlow let out a low whistle. Talbot didn't move, just stared at the container, like it had a fuse on it. 2 hours later, the nurse's office looked cleaner than it should, sanitized to the point of coldness. Mara Ellings sat behind her desk, her face carefully composed. She wore a blue cardigan and the kind of expression you practice in front of a mirror when you're trying not to look guilty. She was early 40s, with eyes a shade too tired for her age. Single, no kids. Kept to herself, mostly. In a town like Pine Valley, that made people whisper. Talbot laid the Tupperware on her desk. "You know why I'm here." She looked at it, not at him. "I don't know what that is." "That's not an answer." Mara blinked, slowly. "You found in my locker?" "You know we did." She swallowed hard. Her hands were steady, though, fingers laced together like someone trying to hold something inside. "I didn't put that there," she said, her voice quiet. "Someone's trying to set me up." Talbot had heard it before, from teenagers, addicts, husbands caught cheating. It never changed. "Listen, Ms. Ellings, we can do this the easy way. Or—" I said I didn't put it there. Her voice rose, a little too sharp, then fell again. "I wouldn't do that." Talbot noticed something shift in her then. Not panic. Something else. A shadow behind her eyes. Like her fear wasn't about the pills. It was about what might come next. "You live alone?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes." He waited. Sometimes silence spoke louder than threats. But she didn't add anything. Talbot stood. "You'll need to come in for questioning." That night, rain slicked the roads outside Mara's small house on Elm Ridge. A one-story ranch, plain as buttered toast, with a porch swing that creaked even without wind. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and bleach. Immaculate. Too immaculate. The living room was neatly staged. Throw pillows, framed photos of lighthouses and forests. No pictures of family. No messy stacks of mail. No warmth. Talbot walked the perimeter while the search team waited for the warrant confirmation. Something about the place made his gut twist. Like someone lived here in a performance. Try and be invisible. Back behind the house, near the shed, he found something. The ground was soft from the rain, but one corner of the garden had been disturbed. Freshly turned soil, newer than the others. He knelt, brushing the dirt aside with his flashlight beam. The tip of a plastic bag peeked through. He didn't dig further, not without gloves. But he had a bad feeling, the kind that burned behind the ribs. Meanwhile, across town, Principal Radley sat in his car in the school parking lot, chewing the edge of a nail. He hadn't told Talbot everything. The truth was, this wasn't the first time Nurse Ellings had come under suspicion. Last spring, a sophomore overdosed on oxycodone. The boy survived barely and never said where he got it. But rumors pointed to the nurse's office. Whisper hints of kids getting pain meds without records. Radley had confronted Mara privately. She denied everything, of course. But she looked at him with something close to contempt. Like he was too stupid to understand what was really going on. He dropped it, chalked it up to gossip. He had retirement in 2 years, didn't need a scandal. Now it was back, this time with teeth. The shed behind Mara's house was locked, but the key was easy to find, taped behind a gutter spout. Inside was gardening equipment, tools, a box of weathered paperbacks, and in the corner, a metal file cabinet. Talbot pried it open. Inside were folders, old medical records, handwritten notes, names, doses, diagnoses, and then a second file with a different set of names. None of them were patients. They were townspeople, a mechanic, a waitress, a deputy's teenage daughter, and beside each name was a number, some kind of tracking system, followed by a symbol, an X, a question mark, or a circle. Talbot's stomach turned. This wasn't about pills anymore. This was something bigger, something intentional. Across town again, at the small diner just off Route 7, a woman named Janine Mallory nursed her third coffee. She was a waitress there, worked a late shift, and had known Mara for years. Or at least, she thought she had. They'd gone to high school together. Lost touch. Then Mara came back from up north a decade ago and took the school nurse job. Quiet, soft-spoken, no drama. But Janine had always felt something off. Mara had this way of looking at you when you talked, like she was listening to something else behind your words, like she was measuring you. And last fall, Janine's daughter Emily got sick. A weird sickness. Nothing serious. But Mara insisted she come to the office every day for vitamin drops. Janine never saw the bottle. Just a note Mara sent home, saying Emily was doing fine. Now, she wasn't sure any of that had been normal. She pulled out her phone, called the sheriff's office. I think you need to know something about Mara Ellings. Pine Valley didn't take kindly to disruption. By Tuesday morning, news had already leaked. Someone told someone who told their cousin who told a guy at the gas station. And by sunrise, the town was humming with half-facts and fearful imaginations. The version of the story going around had Nurse Ellings running a drug ring out of her office, that she'd been giving kids narcotics in exchange for favors, that she was sleeping with someone on the school board, that she'd poisoned the principal. None of it was true, but that wasn't the point. Truth, in Pine Valley, was whatever spread fastest. At the station, Mara sat in the small, windowless interview room, staring at the wall. No one had said much since booking her. Just took her phone, took her fingerprints, and gave her a paper cup of lukewarm water. Her cardigan smelled faintly of detergent. She'd folded it over her arms like armor. Detective Claire Holt entered, sliding a notepad across the table. You know we searched your property, she said calmly. Mara nodded. No shock, no fight. Found a file cabinet with detailed notes on dozens of residents. Some minors. Another nod. You want to tell me what those markings mean? Pause. Mara blinked slowly. They're risk categories. Claire leaned forward. For what? Silence. For what, Ms. Ellings? Mara's eyes finally lifted. Something dark flickered there. Addiction. Instability. Susceptibility. Claire frowned. You were tracking people? I was monitoring potential self-harm, relapses, dangerous behavior, things no one else was paying attention to. Claire's pen hovered above the notepad. You're saying this was for their safety? No, Mara said softly. Not always. Flashback, 9 months earlier. Mara sat in her living room, the lights off except for one dim bulb over the kitchen sink. Her hands trembled slightly as she held an old photograph. 2 teenage girls at a summer carnival. One was her, the other, Abigail, her sister, dead at 17. Overdose. No one saw it coming. The official story was that Abigail had been clean for months. She'd gone to counseling, taken her meds, even joined the school play. But Mara knew better. People didn't change because they wanted to. They changed because someone watched them, held them accountable. Abigail hadn't had that. Now Mara had a new mission. Make sure no one else fell through the cracks like she did. Even if they didn't know they were being watched. Even if it meant breaking a few rules. Present day, outside the station. A gray Honda Civic pulled into the lot just past noon. Inside sat Dr. Paul Reiner, head physician at Pine Valley Urgent Care. 48. Divorced. Built like someone who lifted when he remembered to. He stepped out wearing scrubs and a scowl. He asked for Detective Holt. 5 minutes later, he sat across from her in an office thick with a smell of burnt coffee and too much stress. She didn't steal those meds, he said without waiting. Excuse me. Mara, Nurse Ellings. She didn't steal them. I gave them to her. Claire sat back. You what? She came to me 3 times in the last year. Said she was tracking at-risk kids. Wanted small quantities of unused prescriptions. Stuff we were going to discard anyway. She framed it like an unofficial harm reduction program. Claire raised an eyebrow. You thought that was legal? Reiner looked away. I thought it was smart. And you didn't tell anyone? I wanted to, but she made it sound like the school board was involved. Said it was confidential. Medical discretion. Claire exhaled. This was turning into a nest of hidden arrangements, half-truths, and backroom favors. What else did she ask for? She said. He hesitated. She asked for blood panels. From who? He didn't answer. The garden. That evening, a team in hazmat suits unearthed what lay beneath Mara's freshly turned soil. It wasn't a body. Not exactly. It was a box. Airtight. Carefully wrapped. Inside were vials. Blood samples. Over 50 of them. Labeled in Mara's careful handwriting. Half the names belonged to students. One vial was marked. Emily Mallory. Q3. Watch closely. Detective Holt felt something cold move up her spine. She called Janine Mallory. Did Mara ever request a blood test for your daughter? There was a pause on the line. Then, no. Why? At the Mallory home. The Mallory house smelled of cigarette smoke and cinnamon. The kind of conflicting sense that said someone was trying to clean up a messy life. Janine stood in the hallway, arms crossed, nervous. Emily, 15, thin, with a constantly furrowed brow, lingered on the stairs, watching the adults. She said Emily was showing signs of anemia. Janine explained. Took a sample for school records. I didn't think twice. Emily piped up. She told me not to tell anyone. What? She said if people knew I was being watched, it would change the results. Claire met Janine's eyes. Did she ever give you anything to give to Emily? Janine nodded slowly. Some drops. Said they were vitamins. But Emily hated them. Said they made her dizzy. Claire's chest tightened. This wasn't about watching anymore. This was manipulation. Control. That night, sheriff's office holding cell. Mara sat on the edge of her cot, staring at nothing. Detective Holt entered quietly, holding the list of names from the file cabinet. She dropped it in front of her. I need the truth. All of it. No more riddles. Mara looked up. Why blood samples? Why meds? What were you doing to these people? Mara tilted her head, not defiant, just tired. I was building profiles, behavioral patterns, trying to catch spirals before they collapsed. By drugging them? By managing them, she said. You think people want to be helped? No, they want to be left alone until they crash. I kept them from crashing. Holt stepped back. You poisoned child. Mara's face hardened. No, I kept her calm, focused, away from the edge. I saw it in her, that same twitchy sadness my sister had, the quiet desperation. She looked down at her hands. I wasn't to let her fall. Holt stared at her. For a moment, she didn't see a criminal. She saw someone who would convince herself the ends justified the means. Across town, Coach Barlow's house. In a cluttered kitchen filled with dishes and unopened mail, Coach Barlow sat staring at a grainy photo. It was of him, taken from outside the school gym, through glass. Pinned to the bottom was a note in neat handwriting. X, risk of outburst, keep distance. He dropped the paper and ran to his garage. In the back, hidden under a tarp, he found what he feared, a GPS tracker bolted to his car frame. Mara had been watching him, too. There was something about early morning in Pine Valley, before the sun broke the clouds, before the birds dared to make noise. That in-between hour where everything felt paused, like the world was holding its breath. Detective Claire Holt sat in her car outside the station, engine idling, staring at a hand-drawn map Mara Ellings had scribbled in a moment of rare clarity. It wasn't the town. Not exactly. It was of connections. Lines. Nodes. Arrows. People linked not by streets or addresses, but by risk factors. Trauma. History. Potential. A girl who lost her father in a crash 2 years ago. A boy whose brother died in Iraq. A waitress with a history of self-harm. A gym coach with suppressed rage. At the bottom corner. People fall in predictable patterns. Until someone watches. 10 years earlier, Chicago. Mara's world had once looked very different. She'd been working at St. Aidan's, a psychiatric care facility outside Chicago. Not glamorous, but deeply private. The kind of place rich families sent their inconvenient relatives. That's where she met Dr. Malcolm Vass, head of behavioral diagnostics. He believed in patterns, in neurological profiling, in pre-collapse identifiers. Mara had been captivated. They weren't lovers, not in the traditional sense. But there was a devotion between them, the kind built in dark rooms over long hours of whispered theories and confidential files. Until a patient died. A girl named Cora Jensen, 15, suicide by overdose, under Mara's watch. The family sued. The state intervened. And just like that, Mara vanished from Chicago. No formal charges. Just disappeared. She resurfaced 2 years later in Pine Valley, her record clean. Somehow, present Reiner's confession. Dr. Paul Reiner sat in his office, hands folded tight, watching as Claire Holt recorded his statement. He looked pale, shaken. There were things, she said, he murmured, things about how certain emotional profiles could be managed with mild chemical nudges, not treatment, just influence. He rubbed his eyes. She kept a spreadsheet, said it was to preempt crises, like emotional weather forecasting. I should have known better. Claire narrowed her eyes. You gave her medications to do this? Yes. God help me. And you didn't ask why she needed tranquilizers for students? She called them buffers. Micro-dosing for behavior stabilization. Said it was part of a preventative framework. She sounded so clinical, so sure. He exhaled. She scared me, to be honest. Emily Mallory's truth. It was Emily who told him about the other office. Not the one at school. Not the clinic. The storage unit, she said. She called it her quiet room. Said she went there to think. Unit number 214, rented under a false name, Della Voss, with cash payments going back 3 years. Inside, they found something closer to a war room than a storage unit. Walls covered in photos, notes, psych profiles, school reports, security cam printouts, and a chair in the center, a simple folding chair. pointed toward a mirror. It wasn't for surveillance. It was for observation. Of herself. At the station, reopened the box. Back in holding, Mara sat without her cardigan now. Her arms, thin and pale, showed faint old scars along the forearms. Claire entered, file in hand. You were a patient once. Mara didn't flinch. St. Aidan's, Claire said, before you worked there, before you studied under Vass. Mara tilted her head slightly. For 6 months. What happened? I got better. Claire's voice tightened. You started running your own experiment on this town. I protected it. You manipulated it. A long silence. Then Mara leaned forward, voice low and strange. Do you know how many crises I prevented? How many breakdowns I caught before they happened? You think this place is safe because of your badges and your town halls. Her eyes were glassy. It's safe because I made it that way. Elsewhere, the spiral begins. Coach Barlow didn't come into school that day. He didn't call in sick. He didn't answer his door. His wife had left 6 years ago. No kids. No one had noticed when his car stayed parked too long. When officers finally broke in, they found his phone smashed against the bathroom tiles. His laptop screen shattered. Pinned to the wall, using a kitchen knife, was one of Mara's printed reports. High risk. PTSD, intermittent explosive disorder. Do not provoke. And below that, written in black marker, you had no right to see inside me. Barlow was gone. No blood. No body. Just absence and rage. Detective Holt's turning point. Claire drove out to Lake Miners Hollow, a secluded, fog-heavy stretch that teenagers use for drinking and secrets. She needed air, space, but mostly, she needed silence to hear what her gut had been trying to tell her. Mara wasn't insane, not in the chaotic way. She was calculated, trained, brilliant, even, but she'd crossed a line that once crossed, warped everything after it. She didn't just anticipate collapse, she created it. To validate her own methods, to justify her intrusion. What began as prevention had turned into a slow invasion of people's privacy, their autonomy, their sanity. Claire stared at the water. Her own face ghosted in the reflection. She remembered her sister, lost to addiction at 19. Would she have wanted someone like Mara watching her? Or would it have pushed her faster to the edge? She wasn't sure anymore. Town hall, panic bruise. By Friday, the town demanded answers. Parents gathered outside the school, shouting for principal. The local news showed up. Students whispered in bathrooms. Teachers stopped trusting each other. And the question rippled everywhere. How much did people know, and how long had they kept it quiet? Dr. Reiner resigned. Principal Radley was placed on leave. And Claire? She stood in the back of the gymnasium, watching it all like a slow collapse. The town was unraveling, not because of Mara, but because of the secrets she'd revealed. Things no one wanted to admit. Things they'd rather keep buried. One more file. Back at the station, Claire opened one last folder Mara had tried to keep hidden. The file wasn't about a student. It was about Claire Holt, a full psychological breakdown. Court records, divorce files, her sister's autopsy report, notes on insomnia, detachment, risk of burnout. At the bottom, Holt is next, already drifting, susceptible. Monitor her closely. Claire sat perfectly still. Mara had been watching her too. And maybe, just maybe, Mara hadn't been wrong. The rain had turned Pine Valley streets into rivers of reflected light. Traffic signs, storefront windows, even the old theater marquee. Everything bled red and gold and white across the slick blacktop, like watercolors running together in the dark. Detective Claire Holt drove slow through town, her hands stiff on the wheel. Her thoughts were colder than the weather. Mara Ellings had built a map of their town, not of roads or buildings, but of people, emotional weak points, cracks no one else saw until they split wide open. And Claire? Claire had been one of them. On paper, stable, decorated, a good cop, but in that file folder, clinical, impersonal, she was reduced to a handful of symptoms. Susceptible. That word followed her like a shadow. 3 years earlier, the apartment. Claire had stood in her kitchen, Lights off, holding her sister's old notebook. She'd found it after the overdose, buried under a box of receipts and unpaid bills. Inside were pages of erratic handwriting, drawings, half poems, and a list, 10 names under the heading, People Who Make the Noise Stop. Claire's name was circled, and beside it, but she's tired too. It had haunted her. Still did. She never showed it to anyone. Burned the notebook instead. That moment had marked the beginning of her detachment. And somehow, Mara had seen it without ever asking. Present, Mara's second statement. Back in the interview room, Mara had gone quiet. She hadn't asked for a lawyer, didn't protest her treatment. She just sat, calm and contained, as though the chaos outside didn't touch her. When Claire walked in, Mara glanced up. "You read the file," she said. Not a question. Claire didn't respond. Mara tapped a finger against the metal table. "You're unraveling, you know." Not in a dramatic way. In the quiet way. The kind people mistake for strength. Claire's jaw tightened. "You don't get to psychoanalyze me." "I didn't. I observed you. There's a difference. You invaded people's lives. I watched the people no one else was watching. That's not invasion. That's responsibility." Claire stared hard. "Coach Barlow's missing. He found your report." He snapped. Mara shrugged. He was going to snap either way. "I just moved up the timeline." That made Claire go still. "You're admitting you pushed him?" "I documented what was already there. You think hiding it would have made him better?" Claire slammed a palm on the table. "You're not a doctor. You're not God." "No," Mara said softly. "But someone had to see them. Someone had to carry the weight." Emily's symptoms worsened. At the Mallory home, Emily had stopped sleeping. Her hands shook constantly. She cried at night without knowing why. Doctors ran tests. Nothing showed. No virus. No chemical imbalance. But still, something was wrong. Claire stopped by unannounced one night, watching Emily pace the kitchen like a caged animal. "She said I was broken," Emily whispered, "that I needed her, that the pills would make the thoughts go quiet." Janine buried her face in her hands. "Why didn't I see it?" Claire knelt beside Emily. "Do you remember what she gave you? How long?" Emily nodded. 4 months. She said the first doses were in the drops. Then she gave me the real ones in capsules. She called them balancers. Claire asked, "Did she ever hurt you?" Emily hesitated. "No," she said. "But she never really looked at me either, only through me." The pharmacist's tip. At Pine Valley's only pharmacy, the night shift tech, a quiet man named Luis, finally stepped forward. He'd been covering up strange prescription records for months. Hadn't said anything because the orders came from Reiner's office and Mara had the codes. But now, the weight of it was too much. She ordered lithium. Small doses. Also propranolol. Anti-anxiety. No nootropics. Stimulants. For kids. Louise handed over the logs. Claire traced the names. Some she recognized. Others were still minors. None had parental consent. She exhaled slowly. This wasn't care. This was control. Coach Barlow's car recovered. They found the car on a ridge just outside town, half covered by dead leaves and rainfall. Inside, in the passenger seat, was a small stack of pages. Not a note. Printouts. Emails from Mara. All encrypted. All under an alias. Seneladen 7. She'd been corresponding with him. For months. She'd told him he was a risk. That he had urges he didn't understand. That she could contain the storm before it spilled. She'd offered him medication, monitoring, told him if he accepted her help, he'd never be alone with his worst thoughts again. But she'd also told him something else. "If you stray, I will shut you down." The threat was buried in kindness, but it was there. Claire's breakdown. That night, Claire stood in her bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. She hadn't eaten in 18 hours. Slept maybe 3 in the last 40. Her eyes were ringed with exhaustion, and somewhere deep in her bones, she felt it, that Mara hadn't just broken the town. She'd infected it. Now everyone second-guessed their thoughts, their memories, Every kindness felt suspicious. Every worry a symptom. Claire opened her medicine cabinet. 3 bottles stared back. Antidepressants. Old muscle relaxers. Sleep aids. None of them touched. She closed the mirror with a snap. Sheriff Talbot's confession. Talbot called Claire just after midnight. Need to meet, he said. Voice low. Shaken. They met at the old mill. Talbot lit a cigarette. She got to me too. Claire's brow furrowed. She told me my son was spiraling. Said she could help. I thought she was just trying to be supportive. He looked away. She gave him stuff. Said it would level his moods. But I think she was watching how far she could push him. Claire froze. What happened? He tried to run away last month. Left a note. Said he didn't know who he was anymore. Talbot's voice broke. I blame myself. But now I wonder if she built that storm. Claire swallowed. Hard. They weren't chasing a woman anymore. They were chasing a quiet epidemic. One that had seeped into trust. Into the very heart of how this town functioned. Mara's final move. When Claire returned to the station, Mara was gone. The guard swore he checked every 30 minutes. No signs of break. Just an empty holding cell. And a single page taped to the wall. People don't want to be saved. They want to be seen. I did both. And for that, I was punished. Underneath was a quote from Abigail Ellings, her dead sister. The ones who watch are the ones we need, even if they scare us. Claire crushed the paper in her hand. The town wasn't safe anymore. And somewhere out there, Mara was watching again. But now, she wasn't doing it for the town. She was doing it for herself. Fog hung low over Pine Valley like a curtain no one dared pull back. It wrapped around street lamps and power lines, made headlights look like phantom eyes in the dark. The kind of weather that quieted even the crickets. Mara Ellings had vanished without a trace. No cameras caught her leaving. No vehicles were reported missing. Her home was still under surveillance. No one had bailed her out, officially or otherwise. And yet the holding cell had been empty by morning. It felt impossible. And that, more than anything, made Claire Hope feel sick. Because it meant someone helped her. Someone with access. Someone inside. The deputy's lie. Deputy Marcus Vick was new. Too new. Transferred in from Granger County. Squeaky clean. Worked nights without complaint. Seemed grateful just to be in uniform. Claire reviewed the logs. The 2 a.m. check was signed by Marcus. So was the 3 o'clock. But the camera timestamp said otherwise. He walked away from the security monitors at 2:14 and didn't return for almost 40 minutes. Claire pulled him in. What were you doing? She asked. Marcus shrugged, all casual. Bathroom. 40 minutes? He didn't flinch. But Claire had learned how to listen between the words. She leaned in. You know what she was, don't you? I know she cared, Marcus said. His voice had the soft edge of someone trying not to sound desperate. I knew her from Granger. She treated my sister. Kept her off the streets. No one else gave a damn. Claire nodded slowly. So when she asked for help, I didn't let her out. His voice broke. But I didn't stop her either. He dropped his head. She said the system was going to grind her down. Said if she stayed, more people would get hurt. Not because of her, but because people would turn on each other. She said the storm was already coming. That Pine Valley wasn't ready. The package on Claire's doorstep. The next morning, Claire found a padded envelope on her front porch. No return address. Inside was a flash drive, labeled Last Watch. She plugged it into her laptop, unsure whether she was expecting a manifesto or malware. Instead, it was footage from inside the storage unit. A static camera pointed at the center chair, the quiet chair, as Mara once called it. The footage was time-stamped, over several months. Mara sat there sometimes for hours, staring into the mirror, whispering things to herself too low for the mic to catch. But in one clip, one dated 3 weeks before her arrest, she looked directly into the lens. They think it's about control. It's not. It's about containment. I've seen what happens when no one's paying attention. She paused, looked away, then back again. Claire, if you're watching this, I need you to know you're the last line, not because you're pure, but because you're broken in the right ways. She smiled, faint and distant. I watched you, yes, but not to hurt you, to prepare you. Then the feed cut to black. Claire sat frozen, hands trembling, not because Mara had lied, but because some part of her wanted to believe her. Emily's collapse. Emily Mallory collapsed during gym class. Seizure. Unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within minutes. No signs of drug use. But something in her blood work showed residual compounds, ones not present in any common medication. The hospital toxicologist flagged the compounds as experimental neuroregulators. Synthetic, illegal, not traceable to any pharmaceutical database. Claire called the lab herself. The voice on the other end was terse. Only one facility ran trials with that sequence. Where? St. Aidan's Behavioral Institute. Chicago. Claire felt the floor tilt beneath her. Mara hadn't just borrowed old practices. She continued them, possibly modified them. Dr. Malcolm Vass, the ghost mentor. Claire drove to Chicago that night. St. Aidan's was still standing, now rebranded, whitewashed into something slicker and less memorable. But she found a lead. Dr. Malcolm Vass had lost his license 7 years ago. Unethical experimentation, patient manipulation. It had all been buried under settlements and sealed affidavits. Now he lived in a rundown apartment just off the Red Line, barely functioning, still surrounded by stacks of old journals and printouts. Claire knocked. Vass answered in a rumpled bathrobe, blinking like an owl. Detective Holt? She hadn't given him her name. You're here about Mara. His tone was wistful, not surprised. She was my legacy, he said. She just didn't know when to stop refining the system. Claire pushed past him. You gave her formulas. No, I gave her language, vocabulary for what she already believed. He sipped cold coffee. She never forgave herself for her sister. Believed Data would succeed where emotion had failed. She didn't want to control people. She wanted to keep them from becoming Abigail. He looked at her, eyes sharp despite the decay. And now you'll try to stop her. You'll fail, but you'll try. Back in Pine Valley, the burning. That night, the storage unit burned. An anonymous tip led fire crews there. Too late. Everything was destroyed. The photos, the records, the chair. Claire stood in the smoke, watching the roof collapse in on itself. Ash floated through the air like tiny paper ghosts. The fire marshal ruled it arson. Accelerants used. No fingerprints. She knew it was Mara. A clean erasure. A final act of control. The town unravels. One by one, Claire visited the families. The ones on Mara's lists. The ones labeled with circles, XS, question marks. Some were fine. Others, like Emily, weren't. One mother slapped her across the face when she told her. Another broke down, sobbing, saying she knew something had been wrong, but was too scared to look closely. The mayor called for calm. The school board resigned. The news vans came and went, all feeding off the slow decay of trust. And through it all, one question lingered in every whisper, every glare. Was she right? The letter. 3 weeks later, Claire received a letter. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded page slid under her windshield at the grocery store. Handwritten in blue ink. You weren't chosen because you're strong. You were chosen because you've been broken without breaking others. That's rarer than you think. If you ever need to see what's coming next, go to where the willow tree splits. I left something there. No signature. Claire stared at the message for a long time before folding it neatly into her pocket. The willow tree was a local legend, a giant tree at the edge of the old cemetery, where 2 roots split wide like an open mouth. She went alone. It was midnight. No flashlight, just instinct. She reached the willow, its massive trunk swaying in the wind. The ground beneath it was soft, muddy. She knelt, fingers brushing the dirt between the split roots. And there, wrapped in plastic, was a journal. Mara's. Inside, pages and pages of names. Thoughts. Warning signs. Some redacted, some not. But What chilled Claire wasn't the content. It was the very last entry. My work isn't done, only buried. The journal sat on Claire Holt's kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Its pages were filled with delicate looping handwriting, a strange contrast to the brutal precision of its contents. Psychological profiles, medication records, private conversations reconstructed from memory, whole lives reduced to patterns, risks, triggers. The final pages weren't reports. They were reflections, fragments. If no one watches, the worst things always happen in the dark. They will hate you for noticing. But watch anyway. Claire closed the book gently. Her hands felt heavier than they should have. 3 weeks later, the search for Mara ends. Officially, the county sheriff held a press conference in front of Town Hall. No new leads, he announced. Ms. Ellings is presumed to have fled the state. The case is now inactive unless new information surfaces. The town nodded. But Claire knew better. Mara was still here, not physically, perhaps, but her fingerprints remained. On the people, the systems, the fear. Every decision now carried the ghost of Mara Ellings. Every failure, the echo of her voice. I could have stopped that. The phone call. At 2:13 a.m., Claire's phone rang. Unknown number. No ID. She answered anyway. There was static, then a voice, soft, unmistakable. Emily's relapse isn't biological. It's grief. Claire froze. She won't respond to medication. She needs distance, routine, and to believe she has agency. Then silence. Mara, Claire whispered, but the line had already gone dead. No trace of the call. No record in her logs. Just a voice somewhere in the night, still watching. Emily's recovery. Claire passed a message along. No meds, just time, structure, choices. Emily improved within a month. Janine wept on the phone. It's like she came back to me, piece by piece. Claire said nothing. How could she explain that the person who had nearly destroyed her daughter was also the one who saved her? That's what made Mara so dangerous. She was right just often enough to confuse the rest. Claire at the cemetery. Autumn settled over Pine Valley in quiet, sepia tones. Leaves fell like whispers. The willow tree by the cemetery stood bare and crooked, casting long shadows over the grass. Claire visited it often now. Not to dig, just to think, to feel. Mara had given her the journal, yes, but also something else, a lens through which to see the town's wounds more clearly. The abuse no one talked about, the girls too quiet in class, the teacher drinking during lunch break, the silent kids staring out windows too long. She started writing things down, not to control, not to interfere, just to see, because seeing, that mattered. The house on River Road. A woman named Sandra Ferguson lived alone at the edge of town, quiet, reclusive. She'd once worked at the school cafeteria before her husband's suicide. Lately, neighbors had heard strange noises, broken dishes, screaming. They called the sheriff. He called Claire. I'm not on duty, she said. Doesn't matter, he replied. She asked for you. Claire arrived just after sunset. The house was dark except for one lamp in the back. Sandra sat at the kitchen table, red-eyed, trembling. She watched me, Sandra said. Your nurse. Mara, she came here once. Just stood outside. Didn't knock. Just watched. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to say anything. Just being there, it made me change something. I started throwing the pills away. Started walking again. It was like someone knew I was too far gone, but hadn't given up on me yet. She looked up at Claire with shaking hands. Is she still out there? Claire hesitated, then nodded. She always will be. One final letter. Christmas came cold that year. Snow dusted the porches and pine trees. Children built crooked snowmen. For a moment, Pine Valley felt like it used to, until Claire found a final letter, slipped between her storm door and screen. No envelope, just handwriting she now knew by heart. You were never the target. You were the seed, the one who'd grow into something after I was gone. I couldn't fix the town. I could only tilt it in the right direction. There will be others, ones like me, more careful, more dangerous. You have to see them before they see you. But don't hate me, Claire. I didn't want to be a monster. I wanted to be a mirror. 1 year later, the new nurse. Pine Valley hired a new school nurse. Her name was Evelyn. Soft-spoken, professional. Claire visited the school on the first day of the semester. Evelyn smiled politely. "Can I help you?" Claire just watched her for a moment. Evelyn blinked. "Is something wrong?" "No," Claire said slowly. "Just making sure we start on the right foot." "Of course." Claire glanced at the cabinet behind her desk. Locked. Then down at Evelyn's notebook. Blank. Not everyone who watches is a threat. But not every threat looks like one either. The ending that lingers. Pine Valley moved on. Sort of. The story faded. People stopped talking about Mara. Her house was sold. Her name removed from the school records. New parents didn't even know she'd ever worked there. But Claire never stopped watching. Not with suspicion, but with care. She sat in the back of school plays. She walked through town without sirens. She learned the difference between a cry for help and a quiet surrender. She became what Mara wanted to be. And when she couldn't sleep, she'd open the journal again, just to remind herself that sometimes darkness doesn't arrive with violence. Sometimes it comes wearing a cardigan and a clipboard. And sometimes it just wants to help in all the wrong ways. She hadn't seen Mara since the night of the willow tree. But every time a silence stretched too long, every time someone looked too calm, too still, Claire wondered, is she watching me now? And if she is, what does she see?